Hello. I am the Linux Mensch. Last week I showed you how to go into your Windows 10 computer, partition your drive, and add Arch Linux in as a dual boot. Today I'm going to show you how to go into your Windows 11 computer, but I'm not going to show you how to partition the drive. I'm going to show you how to add another disk and install Arch Linux on that disk. So you'll have Windows on one disk and Arch Linux on another disk. And actually, that's safer to do it that way. You have less chance of your Windows system being destroyed and less chance of an update ruining your Arch Linux system. So let's get to it. Right now, I'm in a virtual machine of Windows 11, and I'm not going to go into disk management and partition the drive because I'm going to add another disk. But well, you know what? Let's open up disk management anyways. Let's go into disk management, make it full screen. So like I said in my last video, I partitioned this Windows drive, but we're going to add another disk instead. So let's close it, and I'm going to shut down. Shut down. One thing I can't stand about Windows is the time it takes to shut down and boot into it, and also the time it takes to do updates. I'm going to pause the video and come back, so don't go away. Okay, so it's shut down. So of course I'm working in a virtual machine. If you're working in bare metal computer, if you don't already have a second drive in there, then you're going to have to add one in. You're going to have to open up the machine and plug in a second drive. And it doesn't matter whether it's a hard disk drive or an SSD. Now this is a virtual machine, so I'm going to add in another disk. And of course, the software I'm using is Virt Manager, which is software that only works in Linux, but you can also have Windows virtual machines in it. So I'm going to open up my Windows 11. You can see down here at the bottom, I have Windows 11. I'm going to open it up. Now we're not booting into it, and I'm going to add another disk. So you see here is disk. It's 128 gigabytes. That's my Windows installation. So I'm going to add another disk. I'm going to go to hardware. I'm going to click on hardware. Add hardware. And I'm going to click on storage. I'm going to add a new storage disk, and it's automatically at 20. Let's make 60. I'm going to make a 60 gig storage disk. I'm going to finish. Okay. In this Windows machine, this Windows virtual machine, I have two disks. I have the 128 gigabyte drive that has the installation of Windows 11 on it, and it has an empty drive of 60 gigabytes right here, 60 gigabytes. Now I'm going to click on here, and I'm going to add the Arch Linux ISO from March 1st. And really, I probably should wait to do this video because there's going to be a new ISO out next week. I'm going to browse, and here is the Arch Linux ISO from March 1st. Like I said, once a month, a new ISO comes out, and there'll be a new ISO out in 2 days by the time this video is released. So I'm going to click on Apply. So if this was a bare metal computer, you'd have to take a thumb drive of the Arch Linux ISO and plug it into your system and boot onto it. But because it's a virtual machine, I've attached the Arch Linux ISO, and I'm going to change the boot options to boot onto the CD-ROM of Arch Linux ISO first. I'm going to apply it, and now I'm going to boot into the system, or onto the ISO, right? Open it up, and let's hit enter. Now I'm going to type in set font tier -132B. I'm going to clear the screen, and I'm going to do vim etc pacman d mirror list. And this is optional. You don't have to do this. And I'm going to type in America. Oh, I did that wrong, right? And I'm going to grab this mirror. I'm going to put it at the top because that's the mirror I want to use. And of course, you can just choose your mirrors from the installer. When you're in the installer, you can choose the mirror from your area of the world where you live. But I like to do it this way. I like to have more control. I'm going to save that. And I'm going to say yes. And I'm going to clear the screen. And I'm going to type in Pacman SYY to sync the mirrors. And like I said, you don't have to do this. And I'm going to clear the screen. I'm going to do lsblk. So you can see SDA is my Windows disk, and it has 4 partitions. And I didn't make those partitions. The Windows installer did when I installed Windows. And SDA1 is 100 megabytes. That's the Windows boot partition. And SDA3 is 127 gigabytes, and that's where my Windows installation is. And SDB is the new 60 gig drive or disk that we added to it, and it's empty. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in CF disk. Now, if we just type in CF disk, we're going to get the Windows drive, but we're not going to get the brand new 60 gig drive that I added in. So I'm going to quit out of there. I'm going to clear the screen, and I'm going to type in, let's just lsblk again. I'm going to type in cfdisk/dev sdb. Now, in my last video, we didn't have to do that because in my last video, when we typed in cfdisk and went into it, it grabbed SDA, which has my Windows partitions on it, but it also grabbed the blank partition that we made because the blank partition that we made was part of SDA. But this time we have an actual new disk in there or a new drive in there, so it won't grab it. So I want to do cfdisk/dev sdb. Let's enter it. And now, normally I go into DOS, but I'm not going to do DOS. I'm going to do GPT, and I'm going to enter it. So now you see we can't even see SDA where my Windows partitions are. So like I said already, I know I'm over explaining, but like I said already in my video from last week, we partitioned the Windows drive. So when we went into cfdisk, you could see all the Windows partitions and my blank partition where we ended up putting Linux on. But here it's different. And if you just go into cfdisk, you're only going to see SDA, your Windows partitions. But when we type in dev, cfdisk dev sdb, then it takes us to our brand new drive or our brand new disk. And we can't see the Windows one. We're not in danger of damaging or doing anything to the Windows one. And here's my new drive, 60 gigs. So you're going to use your arrows to go back and forth, right? I love cfdisk. So I'm going to click on new. I'm going to hit enter. I'm going to hit backspace. I'm going to say 1G for 1 gigabyte. I'm going to hit enter it. Then I'm going to use my arrows to go back and forth. I'm going to go to type. I'm going to click on type. Use my up arrow to go down to EFI system. And then I'm going to go down to the free space, the 59 gigabytes of free space. And I'm going to click it on. And I'm just going to hit enter. And the type is Linux file system automatically, so that's good. So now I'm going to write, and I'm going to type in the word yes. So here, SDB is my new disk or my new drive, and I made a 1 gig EFI system for my Linux boot partition, and I made a Linux file system for my main Linux installation. So now that we've written it, we can quit, and let's clear the screen, and let's bring my face back. So now we're going to lsblk. So now we can see SDA with the 4 partitions belong to Windows, and my second drive, SDB, with 2 partitions belongs to Linux. Now we have to make file systems. I'm going to type in this command, mkfs vbat-f32 dev sdb1. We're making a file system for my Linux boot partition, and notice that the F is capitalized. And this part is the same as my last video, kind of, because in my last video, I was doing it to partition 5 and 6 of SDA, right? Because we took the Windows partition, we split it in half, well, not half, but it made part of it Linux. So it ended up being my Linux boot partition was SDA 5, and my Linux main installation was SDA 6. But now it's SDB. That's why when you're doing this process, you always do lsblk. So I'm making SDB1 my Linux boot partition, and now I'm going to make SDB2 my main Linux partition. I'm making a file system, right? Let's just clear the screen. Let's do lsblk, and let's do make file system period ext4 dev sdb2. And now we're making a file system for the main Linux installation. Okay, now I'm going to clear the screen. Let's just do lsblk again. Now we made file systems for them. Now I'm going to mount them. So I'm going to type mount dev sdb2/mnt. It's mounted. Now I'm going to make a directory for boot. So I'm going to do mkdir/mnt/boot. Now I'm going to mount SDB1 to mount boot. I'm going to type in mount sdev sdb1/mount boot. Now let's see if it worked. Let's clear the screen, lsblk. So now we can see SDB1, my 1 gigabyte, is mounted to mount boot. And SDB2, which is going to be the main part of my Linux installation, is mounted to mount. So now we are ready to go into Arch Install, the automated installer. So I'm going to type, and I'm going to make the font smaller because the large font wasn't functioning properly in the installer the last time I tried. So let's just do set font. Sorry about it being so small. Now I'm going to type in Arch install, and we're logging into the automated Arch installer called Arch install. And I'm going to go to locals, and I'm going to go to local language, and I'm going up to English Canada. I'm going to hit enter, and I'm going to go back. I'm going to skip mirrors because I manually selected my mirror. This configuration, partitioning. So normally I use best effort default partition layout. I'm not going to use that. And I'm not going to go into manual. I'm going to go into pre-mounted configuration, and I'm going to hit /MNT and hit enter. And this part of the video is the same as last week's video. Sorry about that. And I'm going to go back. So we see we're at mount point is /mount. Disk encryption, I'm going to skip today. Swap, I'm going to say no because I don't use swap. Bootloader, so by default it's set to system deboot. I'm going to hit enter, and I use my arrows to go up and down, and I'm going to go to Grub. I'm going to select Grub. Host name is Arch Linux. Let's leave it the way it is. Root password is, put my root password in, put it in again. User account, let's add a user. Match, password, make super user, yes. And I'm going to confirm and exit. I'm going to skip all these. I'm going to skip that one too. I'm going to go to network configuration, use network manager, additional packages. I'm going to do vim, git, terminus, font. And I always put these three in, but now I'm going to add, just like in my last video, DOS file system tools, M tools, OS, Prober. And if I typed it right, it should accept it. Make a mistake, it's not going to accept it. So there we have it. We have a vim, terminus, font, and git, which I always do. And for the dual boot to work properly, we have M tools, DOS FS tools, which stands for DOS file system tools, and OS Prober with a dash. And if you don't type it right in the other screen, it's not going to show up here. You'll get an error message. I'm going to go to time zone and do / and type in the word Eastern and end up at Eastern Canada. I'm going to select it. And now I'm going to go through my install and say yes. So right now we're installing the base Arch Linux installation. It's 152 packages. I'm going to pause the video and come back, so don't go away. Okay, so that took less than 5 minutes because I used a good mirror and I have a fast computer. So it lands, would you like to Chroot into the newly created installation and perform post-installation configuration? And if you don't know, and I'm sure you do, Chroot just means change root. Right now we're in the root of the Arch Linux ISO, and we already have a base installation installed now. So do you want to change root? Do you want to Chroot or change root and go into the root system of your new installation? And the default is no. And if you hit no, then you can reboot and pull out your ISO. But I'm going to say yes. Now, normally I say no, but for this, I'm going to say yes. And like I said, this part is almost identical to the video I did last week. So I'm going to use my arrows to go back and forth. I'm going to say yes. I'm going to hit enter. And I'm going to clear the screen. So now we've changed root. We've Chrooted into our new installation because I have to make some changes. And when I'm not doing a dual boot, at this point, I just would have rebooted into the new system and pulled out the ISO. Or pulled out the ISO, rebooted, whatever, right? Anyways, and what I'm going to do is set font tier -132B, and let's clear the screen. At my GitLab repository, you can download these instructions that I'm following and print them. And you don't even have to download them in the terminal. Well, you can if you want. I'm always encouraging people to download them in the terminal. But you could just go onto your web browser to Linux Mensch GitLab. And it's not GitHub, it's GitLab. And you can download these instructions. They're in the Arch. They're in the Mensch folder, the Arch folder, and the Dual Boot folder. Okay, Mensch, Arch, Dual Boot. And I have these instructions written down step by step. You can print them. And especially for this command, if you don't know how to do this command I'm going to do now, it's kind of long and complicated. And if you don't get it right, it won't work. So if you want to, you should have it written down or printed in front of you. You're going to do grub-install space -- target equals times 86 _ 64 -EFI space -EFI directory equals /boot bootloader -ID equals grub. And I think I did that right. Okay, so I think I did it right. Let's hit enter and see if it works. And it looks like it's working. And it worked. No error reported. Now I'm going to clear the screen. Let's do set font. There we go. And there's the command there. I just want you to be able to see the command on one line. I know it's really small and hard to see. I apologize for that. But like I said, this command, I have written instructions on how to do this, and the command is there. So I recommend you print it and have it on hard copy. Okay, so let's do set font tier dash 132B. I just want to go back to large font. Let's clear the screen. Now we're going to vim into Etsy default grub. And the first line we're going to change, and let's just do this. Set NU. So line 4 is the timeout. So when you boot into Grub, there's a 5-second timeout for you to do something, for you to pause it before it boots into the default program. So I'm going to change this 5. I'm going to change it to 20. So we're going to have 20 seconds instead of 5 seconds. You can even change it to 30 seconds if you want. I think 20 is enough. Okay, so I changed that. So now when we boot into Grub, we're going to have 20 seconds to decide if we want to boot into Windows or into Arch Linux. By default, it's going to boot into Arch Linux. So we don't want it 5 seconds, and we don't want it to boot into Arch Linux if we're trying to get into Windows 11. I changed that to a 20. Now I'm going to go to the bottom of the screen, right at the bottom. And line 63, I'm going to activate it. So line 63, if you take out the number sign or the hashtag, it's going to activate the line, and it's going to make OS Prober work, because without OS Prober is going to search for all the installations you have, and without OS Prober functioning, it won't recognize your dual boot. So we're going to delete that. So we're activating the line. The line is now activated. Now another thing I'm going to do is this. Line 28 is auto, and this grub menu is going to be really small and hard to read. I want it to be larger. So I'm not going to delete the auto line because maybe I want it. So I'm going to copy it. And of course, one thing about doing these things is that you have to know how to use Vim, Nano, NeoVim, something that's going to work in the TTY, and that is on the Arch Linux ISO. And Vim and Nano are on the Arch Linux ISO. So I like Vim though. So what I'm going to do is deactivate the first line. I'd rather do that than delete it, because that way if I want to go back to using the auto one, it's there. I don't have to remember exactly how it was typed out. And now the one that's still active, I'm going to go to the end and I'm going to delete the word auto, and I'm going to type in 800 by 600. Okay, now I'm going to save the file and I'm going to clear the screen. Now I have to make grub. So I'm going to do grub make config -o, -o, and that's an O and not a 0. Boot grub CFG. I think I did it right. Now, if you notice, in these entries, if you read these entries, there's nothing in there about Windows. So we're going to get back to that. Now I'm going to exit, and now I'm going to do umount. Now it's not unmount, it's umount #R/MNT. And now I'm going to shut down. Now I'm not going to reboot, I'm going to shut down. Shut down now. Leave a space and say now. We're shutting down. So we shut down. So now I'm going to disconnect my Arch Linux ISO. And of course, if this was a bare metal computer, when you shut down, you're going to unplug your thumb drive, right? But because it's a virtual machine, I have to unplug or disconnect the Arch Linux Live ISO, right? So I'm going to go to here, this Virt Manager, like I said. I'm going to go to the CD, and I'm just going to disconnect this March 1st Arch Linux ISO. And I'm going to apply it. Yes. So no media detected. So now the CD-ROM is empty. Now we have two disks. We have disk 1, which is 128 gigabytes, which has Windows 11 in it. And disk 2 is 60 gigabytes, which has a base install of Arch Linux in it. So now I'm going to boot into the system. Oh, before I do that, I got to change one thing. And I got to unclick because we have no CD-ROM to boot into. Now, one more thing I want to do before I boot into the system is this. When I click on disk 2, and I want to make that the first boot, okay? And I'm going to apply it. Let's boot into the system. Let's click on my start button. Let's make it full screen. And see, we have seconds. It's counting down from 20. Now we're already at 13. If I don't pause it, it's going to go into Arch Linux because that's the default. But I can use my arrows to stop it. And so you can see that booting into Windows is not an option, but I'm going to explain that after. I'm going to fix it. So we can boot straight into Arch Linux, which is the default. We can go into advanced options for Arch Linux, and you go in there if you have more than one kernel to choose which kernel you want to boot into. Or you can go into UEFI firmware settings. Now, UEFI firmware settings is going to do the same thing regardless of whether it's a virtual machine or a bare metal computer. And I'm not going to go into it now, but what it's going to do, it's going to, if you hit enter and go into it, it's going to take you into the BIOS of your virtual machine or the BIOS of your bare metal computer. And you can go into the BIOS and you can select what system you want to be the default boot, what system you want it to boot into first. But I'm not going to go into there. And like I said, by default, it's going to go into Arch Linux. So let's go into Arch Linux. And remember, we just did a basic install. Right now, I don't have any window managers installed or desktop environments or web browsers or apps or anything. The base install of Arch Linux. I'm going to type in, let's just go into root. For now, you can go into Mensch, but it's just easier if I go into root set font tier -132B. And now I'm going to do lsblk. So we can see our drives. We can see my Linux drive is mounted. SDB1 is mounted to boot and SDB2 is mounted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to mount SDA1. So SDA1, the 100 megabyte partition, the second from the top, is the Windows Boot Manager or the Windows Boot Manager partition. I'm going to mount it. I'm going to type in mount /dev/SDA1. Okay. Like I said, SDA1 is the Windows Boot Manager partition. Okay, so I'm going to mount it to /MNT. Okay, and you can ignore this message. You don't have to worry about it. Let's clear the screen. Let's do lsblk. So now we can see SDA1, the 100 megabyte Windows boot partition is mounted. Now I'm going to make grub again. And I can just use my up arrows. I don't have to type it in again. There it is there. And I type in this command, hit enter, and let it go through. And now if you look, I know 1, 2, 3, 4, about 4 lines from the bottom, it says found Windows Boot Manager. Okay, so now let's reboot. Let's see what happens. Okay, so we have the countdown. See, we're counting down. So let's stop it. We're going to use our arrows to stop the countdown because automatically by default, it's going to go into Arch Linux. And at the top, we have Arch Linux. We have advanced options. At the very bottom, we have the UEFI firmware settings going into your BIOS. But look at now. Now we have Windows Boot Manager. So let's not go into there yet. Let's go into Arch Linux. And I'm going to type in Mensch. Put Mensch's password in. Set font tier -132B. And I'm going to clear the screen and do git clone https://gitlab.com rdbs1/mensch.git. And this command is in the show notes of all my videos. I'm going to clear the screen and I'm going to type in this command cd mensch ls it. I'm going to cd into my Arch folder, ls it, and I'm going to run. I have 2 AutoApp scripts up here. I have AutoApp and AutoApp Basic. I'm going to run the AutoApp Basic. AutoApp Basic, and hit enter. Mensch's password in, hit enter, enter, enter. So we're installing 503 packages. So I'm going to pause the video and come back. So don't go away. That didn't take long. I have a good mirror. Only took about 2 minutes. So I'm going to clear the screen. I'm going to ls it. And I have on the right side, about halfway down, I have a run configs file and a run configs basic. So I'm going to, the 2 scripts, I'm going to do the run configs basic. Okay. Run, should spell it right. So now I'm going to clear the screen. So now what I'm going to do is type in vim, let's do sudo vim etc password without the O and without the R. And I'm going to go to the end of line 1 and I'm going to make that zesh. I'm just making zesh my default shell for root and mensch. Now let's clear the screen and let's reboot. It brings us to the menu. You can see we have the countdown from 20 seconds. And to pause it, you could do that. Okay. And let's just see if we can still get into Windows. Let's hit enter. Let's see if we ruined our Windows system or ability to get into it. And here we go. This is probably going to take like 20 minutes to boot into Windows. One thing I hate about Windows is booting into it. Even powering down takes a long time. And of course, the updates are ridiculous. I love that, eh? Please wait. Please wait. Never have that trouble with Linux. Finally, we're at the login screen. I'm going to type in my password and voila. We're in Windows. Or sort of, it hasn't fully loaded yet. So we're in Windows and let's go to disk management. So we have disk 0 is my Windows. The boot partition is here. The main installation is here. And this is a recovery partition. And then disk 1, which is really disk 2, right? Disk 1. This is my boot partition for Arch Linux and my main Arch Linux installation. We have 2 disks. Okay, and you can see them up here as well. Let's close that. And let's just go to Task Manager. Make it full screen. Let's go into Performance. Go into Memory. So here you can see this virtual machine has 8 gigs of RAM right here. And right here we're using 2.2 gigs. And you might think that's a lot. And perhaps it is, comparing it to Linux. But actually for Windows, 2.2 gig is not bad because my Windows 10 computer at work runs at about 3.5 to 4 gigabytes of RAM with nothing opened. So 2.1 gigabytes is not bad. But like I said, Linux runs a lot less. So now I'm going to reboot. Let's restart. And we're going to go into Linux, my finished Arch Linux installation. And of course, I don't know how long it's going to take for this because it's Windows. So I'm going to pause the video and come back when we get to the boot menu. And there we are. We're at the boot menu and you see the countdown here. So if I leave it, it's going to go immediately into Arch Linux, but we could just hit enter to speed it up. And let's go into Arch Linux. And there we are. We're at LightDM, the login manager. So I don't have any desktop environments installed in this basic one. I have 2 window managers, Qtile and Awesome. Let's go into Awesome. Let's type in my password. And there we are. We are in Arch Linux with the awesome window manager. Okay, and I'm not going to give you a tour of this. I have some of my favorite apps in here. I have Firefox installed, music player, video player, and so forth. And let's just go into the terminal and let's just type in htop. So you can see there's 8 gigs of RAM, no swap, and running at 361 megabytes of RAM. Not bad. And let's just go into a NeoFetch and you can see I'm running Arch Linux with the Zesh shell with the awesome window manager. My terminal is Xterm. Right now we're running at 370 megabytes of RAM out of 7.9 gigabytes. And let's do lsblk. So we can see SDA has my Windows install with 4 partitions and SDB has my Arch Linux install with 2 partitions. I have 2 disks in this Windows install. And that's it. In this video, I showed you how to make your Windows 11 into a dual boot by adding in Arch Linux on a second disk drive instead of partitioning the Windows disk. And it was almost identical to the video from last week. There was just some differences, some minor differences. And I made this video because somebody asked me to do it. And I think this is a safer way to do it because there's less chance of ruining or damaging your Windows install and a less chance of a Windows upgrade damaging your Arch Linux install. And I think it's easier to do too because we didn't have to go and partition the Windows disk. I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please like it and don't forget to subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching. Until next time, I am the Linux Mensch.